On a cool spring morning in 1943, in a small town in Iowa, 22-year-old William Will Carter sat on the porch of his family's farmhouse. In his hand was a letter he had received in the mail a few days earlier, a call from the U.S. Army. The letter said that Will had enlisted voluntarily and was to report to Fort Benning in a week. Will's heart pounded with both pride and fear. The war was raging in Europe. He heard daily reports on the radio about the advance of Nazi Germany and the Allied resistance. But Will dreamed of being part of this war, of defending his country and carrying on the courage his father had shown in the First World War. The wooden floor of the porch creaked, and his mother, Martha, came to him with a cup of coffee. "Will, are you sure?" she asked, her voice shaking. Martha's eyes met the determined gaze her son had known since childhood. Will smiled and took his mother's hand. "Mom, this is my duty. Dad came back, and so will I. I promise." Martha nodded, trying to hold back tears, but the worry was growing like a shadow. That afternoon, Will was with other young people gathered in the town square, all dressed in their uniforms, backpacks on their shoulders, a mixture of excitement, fear, and hope on their faces. The townspeople saw them off with applause. "Will, you're going to bring me a Nazi helmet, aren't you?" Will's younger brother Tommy asked, admiring his brother's uniform. Will laughed, ruffling Tommy's hair. "Of course, little man, but first we have to stop them." As they walked toward the train station, Will's eyes fell on the fields he had played in since childhood, the red barns of the town and the corn silos rising in the distance. This landscape meant home to him. When the train whistle blew, Will threw his backpack over his shoulder and climbed into the car. He waved out the window to his mother and Tommy, still wearing that determined smile. But as the train moved, a feeling whispered deep in his heart. Was this the end of life as he knew it? Will pulled a photograph out of his pocket as he sat in the carriage. A family photo taken last summer with his mom, dad, and Tommy. As he looked at it, a prayer went through him. "Lord, let me see them again." As the train traveled toward the horizon, Will's hopeful eyes were fixed on the blue sky, untouched by war. Little did he know that this hope would soon be tested in the flames of war. June 6, 1944, at dawn. Will Carter stood crammed together with hundreds of other American soldiers on the rocking deck of a landing craft. The air was filled with the smell of the salty sea and the pungent odor of engine oil. The sky was shrouded in a gray blanket as dawn broke. But on the horizon, the orange flashes of explosions appeared. The shores of Normandy were the first real theater of the war Will had imagined since he left Iowa, full of hope. But this was not the heroic scene he had imagined. This was hell itself. As the ship approached Omaha Beach, the officer shouted, "Get ready, boys! This is your day." Will's hands gripped his rifle tightly, but his fingers trembled. His comrade, Eddie, a farmer from Tennessee, turned to him and grinned. "Will, don't be scared. We'll cross the damn beach together." Will nodded, trying to hold on to Eddie's courage, but the knot in his stomach was growing. When the ship reached the shore, the hatches opened and a flood of soldiers poured onto the beach. Only then did the German machine gun fire begin. Bullets tore through the air and explosions rang out, splashing water all around. Will jumped into the water and was drenched up to his knees by the cold waves. "Forward! Forward!" He heard a voice shouting, but it was lost in the noise of the explosions. As Will ran, he saw a soldier fall over the side and collapse into the sea. The water was turning red. As he ran to find cover on the beach, he sensed Eddie was right behind him. But an explosion knocked Will to the ground. His ears were buzzing, his eyes filled with sand and smoke. "Eddie!" he shouted, but his voice sounded foreign, even to his own ears. Searching for Eddie through the smoke, he caught a glimpse of him slumped over, blood seeping from his chest. Will tried to crawl to him, but another explosion knocked him down again. Eddie's lifeless body lay motionless on the bloody sand of the beach. Will was gasping for breath as he ducked behind cover, his hands shaking, his heart pounding in his chest. He remembered that spring morning in Iowa, his mother's worried eyes and Tommy's innocent smile. In that moment, he realized for the first time how cruel war is. His hopes were crumbling one by one on the cold sand of the beach. But he had to survive, for Eddie, for his family, for himself. When he looked up from the trench, his eyes shone with determination. This was the first step into hell, but it would not be the last. 2 weeks had passed since that bloody morning in Normandy. Will Carter had survived the inferno on Omaha Beach, but the loss of Eddie still stung like a fresh wound in his heart. Now, as part of the 29th Infantry Division, they were moving deeper into France to break the Nazi lines. The last days of June were hot and dusty, and the stone houses of the destroyed villages around them bore the scars of war. Will's unit was stationed at a rest stop near the small French village of Saint-Lô. Will sat in the shade of an apple tree, cleaning his rifle. His face was very different from that of the idealistic young man on the beach, with dark circles under his eyes and a few days' growth on his chin. But he was not alone. He was with two soldiers who had been his companions during the short time with his unit. Sam, a sniper from New York, and Joe, a jovial radio operator from Texas. "Carter, if you rub that rifle any harder, it's going to shine," Sam said, looking at Will with a cigarette in his hand, smiling wryly. Joe laughed as he fiddled with the radio. "Leave it, Sam. The kid's still in shock from the beach." Will looked up with a slight smile. "I wouldn't have made it this far without you two," he said, sincere gratitude in his voice. Sam and Joe had become Will's new family. They had saved each other's lives many times since Omaha. One night, when a German patrol tried to ambush them, Sam's sniping had saved them. Another day during an air raid, Joe's radio call for reinforcements had saved the unit from annihilation. Will trusted these two men more than anything. That evening, Sergeant Harper, the unit commander, called them together. "Tomorrow we enter Saint-Lô," he said in a stern voice. "The Germans will defend that village to the end. Be prepared." Will, Sam, and Joe looked at each other. There was fear in their eyes, but also determination. Sam threw down his cigarette and said, "We go in together, we come out together." Joe, putting on his radio headset, said, "That's right. Carter, you get out alive, okay? I need you to get that helmet to Tommy." Will felt his heart sink at Joe's mention of Tommy. His family in Iowa was like a memory from another life. As night fell, a campfire was burning around the troop. Will, Sam, and Joe sat by the fire, quietly telling each other stories. Sam talked about his girlfriend in New York. Joe said he missed his days riding horses on his ranch in Texas. Will pulled a worn family photo out of his pocket. "When this war is over, I'm taking that helmet to Tommy," he said, his voice determined but fragile. Sam tapped him on the shoulder. "You will, Carter. We're all going home." In the crackle of the fire, Will once again thought about how cruel war was. But this time, he was not alone. The presence of Sam and Joe gave him a glimmer of hope, even in the midst of war. Tomorrow in Saint-Lô, they would face a new test, but they would face it together. As Will put the photo in his pocket, he made a promise. No matter what it takes. On the morning of the march towards Saint-Lô, the air was shrouded in a heavy fog. Will Carter and his unit, part of the 29th Infantry Division, were moving silently along a narrow path. The warm bond forged last night at the campfire had given way to a tense silence. Will, clutching his rifle tightly, walked beside Sam and Joe. Sam, the sniper, was looking around as usual, while Joe had his radio earpiece pressed to his ear, waiting for a signal. Sergeant Harper was at the front, setting the pace of the unit, but as the silhouette of the ruined buildings of Saint-Lô appeared on the horizon, a sense of unease settled over the unit. Suddenly, machine gun fire raked the path. "Ambush!" shouted Harper, but his voice was lost in the noise of the explosions. The Germans were firing from the bell tower of a ruined church. Will saw Sam fall next to him as he threw himself to the ground. Joe was hiding behind a boulder with his radio, trying to call for backup. Bullets whizzed around and rocks flew through the air. "Take cover!" Will yelled, looking at Sam, but Sam's eyes were locked on the bell tower. "I'm going to take out that sniper," he said, pointing his rifle. Sam stood up from behind the boulder for a moment and took aim. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, a bullet grazed his shoulder. "Sam!" Will shouted, but Sam gritted his teeth and kept aiming at the sniper. A second shot, this time hit Sam in the chest. Sam was thrown back as if suspended in midair for a moment and collapsed. Will felt his heart squeeze, the fear of losing another comrade after Eddie gripped his whole body. He crawled to Sam's side, but Sam's eyes were already glazed over. The rifle he had been holding had slipped from his bloody hands and fallen to the ground. No, no, no! Will tugged at Sam's uniform, trying to shake him, but Sam's body was still now. Will's eyes welled up. The cold reality of war had hit him once more. Joe reached them, still under fire until backup came over the radio. "Will, we have to go!" he shouted, but Will just stood there, clutching Sam's lifeless body. Joe grabbed Will's arm and yanked him away. "He's gone, Will!" "But we're alive. We have to keep going." As the column retreated under German fire, Will's mind was a blur. Sam's smile as he spoke of his lover in New York, his words around the campfire. "We go in together. We come out together." All came back to him, but Sam couldn't get out. Will felt the family photo in his pocket as he ran, the promise to Tommy, that spring morning in Iowa, his mother's worried eyes, all of it fading in the shadow of war. Now there was only one reason to stay alive, to protect Joe and survive this hell. As the German fire eased, the unit gathered in a ditch. Will, panting, still held Sam's bloody rifle in his hand. "We'll get through this, Carter," Joe said, touching his shoulder, but his voice was brittle. Will nodded, but something inside him was forever broken. War wasn't just destroying bodies, it was destroying souls. And Will was one step further away from that idealistic young man. After the ambush at San Lo, Will Carter and his unit had retreated to a wooded area with the remaining soldiers of the 29th Infantry Division. The loss of Sam left a deep wound in Will's soul. Every night when he closed his eyes, he would see Sam's last glance as he took aim at the bell tower. The hot days of July 1944 gave way to cool, humid nights. The unit had set up camp deep in the forest, waiting for a new mission to break through the German lines. But that night, a signal would be heard that would change everything. Will stood guard at the base of a tree, Sam's blood-stained rifle in his hand, his eyes fixed on the darkness. A few meters away, Joe, the unit's radio man, dozed at his radio. Only the sound of crickets and the echoes of distant cannon fire filled the night. Just as Will was about to fall asleep, Joe's radio crackled. Will sat up, startled. Through the static, a muffled voice was heard. "Raven! Raven! It's a trap! Run, .. The sound suddenly stopped. Will immediately woke Joe up. "Joe, did you hear that?" Joe sleepily grabbed for the radio, but the signal had disappeared. "Maybe it's a German trick," Joe said, frowning. But Will had another thought. The voice sounded familiar, like Sam's voice. But that was impossible. Sam had died in St. Lo. Nevertheless, Will's heart began to race. This could be a trap, but what if it isn't? He said, a trace of hope in his voice. They woke Sergeant Harper and explained the situation. Harper marked the direction of the signal on the map, a few kilometers beyond the German lines near a valley. "It could be a trap," Harper said, "but if it's an Allied signal, we have to rescue them." Will, Joe, and a few soldiers were sent on a reconnaissance mission in the dark of night. As Will slung Sam's rifle over his shoulder, a feeling whispered inside him. This mission would change everything. As they moved through the dark forest, the air grew colder. Moonlight filtered through the branches of the trees, casting a pale shadow on the ground. With each step, Will pondered the source of the signal. "Carter, if this is a trap, they're going to kill us all," Joe said, carrying the radio on his back. His voice strained. Will nodded. "I know, but if it's Sam's voice, I let him down once. I'm not letting him down again." Joe stopped when he saw the determination in Will's eyes. As they reached the valley, the lights of a German patrol appeared in the distance. Will and the team hid behind a rock. The radio crackled once more. "Raven! West! Run!" Will was sure this time. The voice was Sam's. But how could it be? His heart was caught between fear and hope. "Will, it's a trap," Joe whispered, but Will had already made up his mind. "We're going west," he said, his voice shaky but determined. As the team moved westward through the darkness, one question echoed in Will's mind. Would this signal save him or destroy him? The night deepened as Will Carter and his team headed west in search of a mysterious radio signal. Evading German patrols, they took refuge in an abandoned farmhouse. The farmhouse bore the scars of war, broken windows, shattered furniture, and bullet holes in the walls. Will sat at a table in a small room of the house while the rest of the unit slept. In his hand was a worn piece of paper and a pen, which he pulled out of his pocket. Will's mind had been thrown into turmoil by the fact that the radio signal sounded like Sam's voice. He decided to write a letter that night, hoping to get home to Iowa. In the light of a flickering candle on the table, Will pressed pen to paper. "Dear Anne and Tommy," he began, but the words caught in his throat. His eyes were fixed on the dusty surface of the table. The full weight of the war had fallen on his shoulders. "Everything is very different here," he wrote, his handwriting shaky. "The war is not just about the heroic stories we hear on the radio. Every day we lose a part of ourselves. Eddie on the beach, Sam in St. Lo. They were my brothers, but I couldn't protect them." Will stopped writing for a moment. His eyes fell on the family photo he pulled out of his pocket. It showed his mother Martha's smiling face, Tommy's joyful laughter, and his father's proud posture. He remembered that spring morning in Iowa. His mother's worried eyes, Tommy's question, "You're bringing me a Nazi helmet, aren't you?" Will's eyes welled up. A tear fell onto the paper and smeared the ink. "Tommy, I'll get that helmet," he wrote, his voice echoing through him. "But I'm afraid, what if I can't come back? What if I never see you again?" As he wrote, a gust of wind came from outside, and the flame of the candle flickered as the cold air blew in through the broken window. Will finished the letter. "Mom, please take care of Tommy. Tell him his big brother is always with him. I love you so much. Will." He folded the paper, but didn't put it in the envelope, because he knew he might not get a chance to send this letter. As he put the letter in his pocket, a prayer went through him. "God, please let me survive this hell." Just then, there was another crackle from Joe's radio. Will sat up, startled. The same hoarse voice was speaking again. "Raven, Valley, Dawn, ... As Will tucked the letter tightly into his pocket, his heart filled with hope and fear again. Was that Sam's voice, or a trick the war was playing on him? As dawn broke, Will and the team prepared to leave for the valley. But in Will's mind, the warmth of home in Iowa and the love of his family collided with the cold reality of war. That letter might never be sent. As dawn cast a faint light across the valley, Will Carter and his team traced the radio signal to a German outpost. The last days of July 1944 had passed like a lifetime for Will. The hopeful young man from Iowa was now a man scarred by war. His face was covered in dirt and sweat. The bruises under his eyes deepened, his uniform torn and blood-stained. He still carried Sam's rifle in his hand, but it was no longer a weapon, but a memento of his fallen comrades. Joe was right next to Will, his radio on his back. The team was hidden in the bushes around the outpost, preparing for one last mission. Sergeant Harper explained the plan in a whisper. "This outpost is the Germans' line of communication. If we destroy the radio tower, we will disrupt their lines. But be careful, they're outnumbered." Will nodded, but the mysterious signal still echoed in his mind. Raven, Valley, Dawn. The signal had brought them this far, but Will still couldn't believe he'd heard Sam's voice. Still, this mission could be the end for him. Salvation or destruction. The team quietly infiltrated the outpost. Will and Joe moved in the shadows from one shack to another to reach the radio tower. But a German patrol spotted them and alarm bells began to ring. With bullets flying, Will and Joe took cover behind a wall. As Joe radioed for backup, Will stopped for a moment. He felt the letter in his pocket, the letter he had written to his parents but never sent. "Joe," he said, his voice determined, "if I don't make it out, get this letter to my mom in Iowa." Joe nodded, seeing the seriousness in Will's eyes. "I promise, Carter, but we'll both get out." Will took a deep breath and gripped Sam's rifle. "Then let's finish this," he said. He burst out from behind the wall and opened fire on the German soldiers. With each shot, he thought of Eddie's last moment on the beach, Sam's fall at St. Lo, and his family's laughter in Iowa. Will managed to reach the radio tower and planted the grenade. As the explosion leveled the tower, Will felt a bullet graze his shoulder. He fell to the ground, but Joe grabbed him by the arm and pulled him up. "Come on, Carter! Let's go!" As the German outpost went up in flames, Will and Joe fled into the woods. The reinforcements arrived just in time to drive off the remaining German soldiers. Will was gasping for breath when he collapsed against a tree. The wound in his shoulder was bleeding, but he was alive. Joe knelt beside him and smiled and said, "We did it, Carter. You're taking that helmet to Tommy." Will looked up at the sky, the dawn glowing with a golden light filtering through the clouds. At that moment, he pulled the letter out of his pocket and handed it to Joe. "Send this, Joe, but I'll be back." I promised them the war had changed Will. The idealistic young man had given way to a man burdened by the war, but still harboring shreds of hope. The mystery of the radio signal may never be solved, but Will believed it kept him alive. Perhaps Sam's spirit, perhaps his own resilience. As listeners contemplated Will's journey, they would be left with one question. Would Will still be alive when that letter reached Iowa?